we get lots of great speakers at CDC, so we're very lucky that we can attract such a high caliber of speaker to come and talk to us. But I think I can say without any fear of contradiction that it is really an enormous privilege and pleasure to have the opportunity to welcome here to CDC Strive Maziyiwa. And I say that because obviously Strive is somebody that we know through our investment portfolio as the founder of Econet, Econet being the largest shareholder in Liquid Telecom, and CDC, of course, at the beginning of this year, having made an investment of $180 million in Liquid. And that's an investment I think that we've talked many times about, and it's certainly in my time at CDC probably the investment that I'm most proud of. And I think you'll get a sense for that when you listen to Strive as he talks about his vision for connecting, building a fiber network across Africa and the benefits that brings to Africa. But really, Strive is more than just a business person. Today, he is one of Africa's leading statesmen. He is one of Africa's leading philanthropists. He's a role model, literally, to millions of people, young people across the continent. He serves on the board of Unilever. He serves on the board of the National Geographic Society. He is on the advisory board of the Council for Foreign Relations. He's on the advisory board of Stanford University. He has worked with the UN on commissions to develop education, to develop power in Africa. He's been a driving force with President Kagame of the reform of the African Union and the Continental Free Trade Association. And perhaps more importantly than even that, he is a philanthropist. And together, he and his wife, many years ago, formed the Higher Life Foundation. Today, that foundation has ensured that 250,000 orphaned and vulnerable children in Africa that would not have received an education have received an education. And as I said, he's a role model. He has, believe it or not, 4 million followers on Facebook. When I looked yesterday at the ranking of influencers on Facebook, Strive was ranked among business influencers #1 in the world, ahead of Bill Gates, ahead of Mark Zuckerberg. So it is an extraordinary pleasure and privilege to welcome Strive here today and listen to him talk about his experiences and his vision for Africa. In order to sort of draw out those thoughts, we've asked Colin to interview him and a Q&A, and then when Colin will put some questions to him, and then afterwards we'll give you the opportunity to ask them as well. So thank you. Thank you for being here, Strive.
So Strive, thanks for joining us today. I think everyone who was looking forward to attending this at some point looked at your Wikipedia page. So let's get that out of the way. It's an incredible story. Let's go back to the start of your career. It's the mid-1980s. You've just graduated from the University of Wales. You've got a great job in, I think, Cambridge. You throw it all down, you pack up, and you head back to Zimbabwe to start as an entrepreneur in Zimbabwe. I mean, what were you thinking?
Actually, it's quite funny. I carried a passport. I had a British passport, which had stamped in it, subject of the British Empire, because I was from Rhodesia. So I went into, they said I could go in now and get the new Zimbabwe passport. So I went, I was in the queue, and there was this other guy come to get his new Zimbabwe passport. And we got into a conversation. And he said, you really need to go home. I said, but I'm working on computers and stuff. He says, no, I'm going home. He was a physicist. So I wasn't attached to it. Within a week, I had left my job and I was heading home.
As easy as that?
As easy as that. It's great when you're that young, you
So when you got back to Zimbabwe, I think you had some pretty hard going. And you've made your career by starting businesses and by growing businesses in the face of a lot of economic and political headwinds. we often talk about our investee companies as being ones that face the same, and I'm wondering, from that experience, are there any general lessons that you can draw about how to grow a company in those types of environments?
Well, we faced an extraordinary amount of headwinds. Setting up the Econet group was the most challenging because I just wanted to set up a mobile network business. And I went to the government and I said, there's this new industry called mobile networks. You guys take it for granted, but there was a time when it didn't exist. And I'd have to bring out a dummy phone to show people what it was going to be like. And they weren't amused. They said, do you work for the CIA? I said, why? They said, well, you want to run a national telephone network. That's done only by governments. I said, no, it's actually, private people can do it too. It got worse. Anyway, we ended up in a big fight. I took them to court. It took 5 years. The president, who finally died last week, called me public enemy number 1. But, fortunately, the courts worked, which is lesson number 1. You need to go in countries where courts work. It doesn't matter how well connected you are politically and everything. One of the things we often forget is the importance of courts, of the legal system in a country. So we were licensed by the Supreme Court of Zimbabwe. And Mugabe sacked them for making that decision. But the decision stood, and we set up the business. And the long story is, of course, we are more than 10% of the national GDP in that country as a result of the businesses that emerged from there. But that having been said, one of the lessons I learned was you got to diversify your national presence. No matter how well you're doing in a particular country, it's good to be diversified. So even as I fought that battle, I already had it in my mind that I must set up this business in other countries. So I went to Botswana, less of a battle. Believe it or not, I paid $1,300 for a national cell phone license.
Have you worked out the ROI on that?
And it's actually, the company I created from that license is the second largest company in Botswana, after the diamond pump company, which is Mascom. And so I went on to look at opportunities in other African countries as we went along. But I always had this idea that you diversify your risk by being in as many countries as you can, and that's remained part of my philosophy.
So you're known for having a very strong belief in both ethics, integrity, and also good governance. And although you sort of blithely cross over this idea of taking the government of Zimbabwe to court, I mean, that was over issues of ethics and good governance, and frankly, it almost bankrupted you. Yeah. This, again, is an issue that our investee companies face a lot. And what are your views, and what is your advice to a company that faces this? How do you do business in some of these environments and maintain that sense of integrity?
Well, and if you look at the Zimbabwe case, the truth is, probably a year or so into the battle, the issue could have been settled. I was given the names of the people who I had to accommodate in the license. Accommodate these people, and you can be licensed. And I sat it out for 5 years. I said, I'm not going to accommodate a single person in this license. So you wait. I was patient. I waited them out. When you all know about the story in Nigeria, which was very unfortunate because we had secured the license, we'd set up the business in Nigeria, it was doing very well. It was one of 2 mobile operators, MTN and ourselves. And But one of the shareholders was a state-owned investment group. And they came and they said, you know, our governor believes that he should be a direct shareholder. I said, what do you mean your governor should be a direct shareholder? You are a shareholder. So no. The governor himself has to be a shareholder. So started another dispute. And that one was harsh because they were so powerful. They said, if you don't accept, you're a minority shareholder, because we were 20 shareholders. You're the managing shareholder, but you're a minority. So if you don't accept the deal, you lose your management rights over the company. And I had 200 people in the country, all expats. And in one afternoon, we were ordered to leave. And we left. We left the country, and became a battle. But we, you know, it became a huge public battle. And eventually, that governor ended up in prison in the UK as part of that battle. So, you know, these things can be harsh and difficult, but over time what I realized is good people begin to know your position. So it's amazing, even where we fought in Zimbabwe, people would say to me, so Strive, you know a lot of things that were going on. You had documents, you had, you know, I remember sitting here in London, somebody came from Nigeria with discs. In an envelope, sealed, says, you're looking for evidence. I'm a Nigerian. I believe in what you're doing. We opened this thing and it's got everything that we needed for our legal battle. So, you know, there are good people who begin to become part and parcel of what you... There are more good people still in the world than there are bad people. The bad people are just louder.
It's good to hear that sense of optimism. Let's talk a little bit about that, finding those good people, because a lot of people bemoan the absence of good management and good management skills in Africa. And obviously, you're an example that I suppose they would take as, you know, an outlier. But in truth, you've built great teams, and you've built teams of people who share your views, who have stayed with you for, in some times, you know, over a decade. How do you find those people? How do you build them, and how do you kind of keep them going in your businesses?
I'll give you an example. Liquid Telecom. Where is Nick? Are you here? So take Nick Rudnick, who runs Liquid Telecom.
Right. CEO.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Nick was a young lawyer, is white Zimbabwean, young lawyer, worked in the legal team that fought against the government for a local firm. And at the end of this project, when we win, he comes over to me and he says, actually, I've enjoyed this so much, can I be part of the company now? I said, sure. Okay, goodness, that is 20 plus years. So a lot of my senior leadership team are like Nick. They came, usually, I look for people who are very passionate, who want to do it for more than the money. Money matters, but they believe in it. And part of it is just being able to spot them. You know, I was giving a speech at a place like this in Yale, and a young Ethiopian comes up to me and she says, "So Asiwa, I read that about how you left Africa. Don't you come and see me, you guys, from Africa." It's just, I'm challenging you. Give me the same opportunity. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I want to go home, and I want to go home next week. And I want to come and work for you." I said, "Okay, here's my question. Are you out trying to get to Ethiopia, or are you trying to get to Africa?" She says, Africa. I said, okay, come and see us next week. She works for us now. She runs one of our major initiatives out of Nairobi. You can spot those kind of people. And those kind of people will be there no matter how hard it is. I mean, I've got guys, the Zimbabwean entire leadership team was held in prison. Imagine, Mugabe ordered my leadership team, including directors, imprisoned, just collected from their homes, taken to the national security prison, where they held death row inmates.
That's
for
a
16
novel
days.
team-building exercise, isn't it?
16 days they were there. At the end of 16 days, they were released and told, tell your boss, he talks too much. So next day, I made a statement. I said, Mugabe, I'm in your face. Okay, I'm going to talk some more. But you know, it's so but every single one of the people that were imprisoned like that, they're still in the company. Yeah. And they are stronger and they run different parts of the group. So you find those kind of people.
And your story about the woman who wanted to return to Africa is an interesting one, because you're also known as a mentor beyond just the teams. But lots of people have tried mentorship programs and they've worked through universities. You've chosen a rather unique way of doing this mentoring through this Facebook platform, which Nick referenced, and you've got over 4 million followers. And I'm kind of curious, why did you choose that avenue to express your desire to mentor the next generation?
See, my daughter, who's 28, she turned 28 yesterday. So she was at business school. And so she said to me, you know, I need you to help me. I'll send you questions and then you answer them. I said, fine, okay. She says, you know, so I start sending her these things. And then she said to me, you know, I share your notes with my friends. I said, your friends? How many? She said, actually, quite a few. I put it on Facebook. I said, what do you mean Facebook? She said, well, you know, I edit a little bit and then I said, so it was young people understanding. And so when I said, okay, well, all right, let's do it your way. So my daughters surrounded me. They kind of took the fear of Facebook away from me. I said, okay, we do it. And we posted something. I got 30,000 followers day one. I said, wow. So, so we had to kind of put a team around. So there is a team that works around it. And we work together every day we get comments. And I set aside time. We just go through the comments and I respond. And what I found is that it's in the responses. So I was learning about them. As much as I try to teach them, they teach me more.
That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. Let's talk a little bit about Africa. Mm-hmm. You know, recently after the Africa Continental Free Trade Area was announced, South African President Ramaphosa declared that this was going to be Africa's century. And we've heard this before, but I mean, I'm curious your views. Do you think it's different this time? And if so, why?
Well, I'm a bit biased, I guess, because I've spent the last 3-4 years on the Continental Free Trade Area. So I've been in the back room working on this. So I'm part of the Reform Task Force. The African Union is not like the EU. For those Brexit friends of mine, it's not a EU thing. But obviously we have a continent with 54 sovereign countries. And what we've tried, the message we got through to the leaders. I remember when President Kagame asked me to present my views on this. I said, I just want to talk to you in numbers. Africa is 1.2 billion people, continental Africa. our GDP is 2.5 trillion. India is 1.2 billion people. Their GDP is 2.5 trillion. We're bigger than Russia as a continent, okay? Our problem is nobody sees any of that. It doesn't matter whether you're Nigeria or you're South Africa, we are too small, okay? Then I said, look at the trade between us. Is the lowest of any continent. We're at 14%. If we don't get to 40%, like, we just will not trigger growth. And that's the way I went in as a member of this Reform Commission, to try and put the economic story. And of course, so the free trade area is part of the building blocks of that. We want free movement of goods. We want free movement of people. Free movement of people is really critical. So one of the things we actually secured was the emergence of an African passport. For the first time, you can now, every single African can hold two passports. Their national passport and their continental passport. So that's been passed. So we're beginning to kind of open up the trade. There's a new generation of African leaders that's also emerging, who are not carrying the baggage of the historical context, the nationalism and the colonialism and so, but begin to realize that we need to basically get on with the job of building the continent. Okay, and when you kind of look at it, we can change this narrative. Africa gets a lot of aid, that's true, but it's $50 billion. Okay, on a continent of 2.5 trillion. But if you grabbed somebody in the United States in the street and say, Africa, what do you think they live off? They say, they get donations, they get, but it's not true. Because when you take the 50 billion and you actually break it down, it goes to less than 10 countries. So the rest of Africa doesn't actually know about donor aid. Okay, and it's small amounts. So the core thing is to face the world on equal terms as an economic player. And that's really what we want Africa to do, to stand and say, we're an economic player. Yes, there are difficulties in parts of the continent. Like any developing world, Asia has problems. Okay, there are parts of Europe, the Ukraine and Russia, there's war there. Okay, so we've got to get a correct perspective. We're 54 countries. There are no two African countries today at conflict with one another. We haven't had an inter-country conflict in Africa for more than 20 years. Okay, that's not in the common narrative. All 54 African leaders today can meet in a room and do so every year. That could not happen in Asia. That you had all leaders of Asia in a room. There are differences among some of them that are so deep, they would fight on the other side of hell if they had a chance. So we have things that we can build on. We have extraordinary challenges, but if we can get the continent to see that they're not giving up sovereignty, but there's a lot that can be done working together. So we're beginning to see that roads are being built that are continental. Railway lines are being built that are regional. You know, so there are a lot of regional discussions. Say, let's have a road, let's have a pipeline, and that's how you're going to build it.
Let's pick up this theme of infrastructure because, CDC has infrastructure in its blood, and perhaps we've gotten a little jaded over the years. But even amongst the most jaded of us, the liquid telecom investment was pretty exciting, and there was a lot of talk around the office about it. Can you share with us a little bit of that aspiration for the Cape to Cairo route, and maybe share a little bit of what we were talking about beforehand, of some of the challenges that you face in making that a reality?
I never shared the idea of a Cape to Cairo route with anybody other than 2 or 3 people. I never said I was going to Cairo, because you don't say things like that, particularly to investors. You know, we basically were responding to needs. Where I saw the opportunity was we had 2 mobile networks, one in Botswana and one in Zimbabwe, and there were 2 countries were landlocked. So also this talk about cables and CCOM and so, well, they weren't getting to Harare. So we said, okay, so why don't we connect the countries that are landlocked to the undersea cables? That's how the vision sort of began for us. So we kind of connected from Johannesburg to Harare. Then the Zambians said, but we are landlocked too, and we connected them. And then we connected southern DRC. So they were now all connected to Cape Town and Johannesburg to the undersea cables. And then we made an acquisition in East Africa. And we said, okay, let's connect the 2. It was only when we got to Kenya that I started to whisper, Cape to Cairo. let's do Cape to Cairo, Cape to Cairo. And then everybody got excited. And then when I went to see the Ethiopians were very interesting because they would not allow a private telephone operator to cross there, to even enter Ethiopia. So I went to see the new prime minister and I gave him a big map and I said, I'm trying to connect Cape to Cairo, but I'm stuck. He said, how? So he looked at my map. He said, it's Ethiopia. I said, yes, Prime Minister, it's Ethiopia. He said, why can't you cross Ethiopia? I said, it's your laws. He said, okay, when are you leaving? I said, this evening. He said, you will not leave this country without that authorization. And he gave me the authorization that afternoon. It was all done, all documentation. He canceled his afternoon. He says, what do we have to do around our own law to let this guy cross the country? So we crossed. So now we've moved on, as you know. We're now doing east to west. So we've now moved from Sudan through Chad to Nigeria. And we've crossed the Congo to get to the other side. So it's been fun.
You have a unique view of fun. Let me ask you one more question, and then we'll open it up for questions so all of you start thinking about your questions, duly noted. And this is about education. So education is clearly really important to you. I mean, one of your philanthropic activities is the Higher Life Foundation, which provides scholarships for disadvantaged and gifted children. But you've never invested in education that I know of, and I'm curious why you haven't done that, and really using that, how you see the roles for philanthropy and investment along each other.
Well, the philanthropy piece, as I've spoken about it often, in life we need to understand sometimes that we just have to respond to the needs around us. I was running a construction business, and HIV struck in the early 90s. And for many of you who are younger than I am, you don't know what it was like. Being an owner of a small African business, I had to attend funerals for my workers. And I probably attended 5 funerals a week. And you got a construction guy who's just died. His wife is now sick, and they have kids. And there's no such thing as a pension. So I got this little crisis that let's do something. So my young wife and I, we said, okay, you know what, why don't we just send them to school? We make sure they have food to eat, the kids go to school. There are no orphanages. So, okay, we put a plan together. We give them to grandparents, cousins. We say, we'll pay your school fees, we'll buy your uniforms, keep them in school. A couple of months later, it's 100 kids, which means that's how many parents had died working for me. This is a national crisis. In those days, we thought countries like Botswana would become extinct. That's how HIV was. So we responded to it, and then my wife came. She worked for the UN, and she came one day. She says, we've got 100+ kids. I think that the best thing is for me to quit my job. And I will run this. We register as a foundation. Let's open it up to more kids. And we just kind of keep gathering as many as we can. So fast forward, and we never, ever went to anybody else for funding. We did it ourselves. And so fast forward, probably costing us $200 a year to keep these kids in school. And when we celebrated our 20th year, I said, so how many have we done? She said, we've done 250,000 scholarships over those years. And then you become like a parent to these kids. And so you can't certainly find a child who's got to finish their O-levels, and they've done very well, and you say, well, our program ends at 18. You say, okay, can you go to university? I say, sure, I want to go to university. I say, okay, go to university. So we started giving. We said, you go as far as you can. So we've got kids that have done PhDs, and then we started, okay, let's really go for the highly gifted kids, but let's not make it means tested. How about just picking out 100 of the smartest kids we can find in any country where we operate, okay, and help them to go through, okay? Like I've got one here, Dalamuzi, okay? He's my assistant. Stand up and say hello, Dalamuzi. Hi. So Dalamuzi was one of our scholarships, okay, of the highly gifted kids. So he went to Harvard, and he went to Oxford, and he's a Rhodes Scholar. And we've had 5 Rhodes Scholars consecutively for the last 5 years.
Great.
So that's how our program has worked.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.